Good afternoon, my friends, and welcome to our webinar pertaining to recruiting and retention in turbulent times. I want to welcome those of you who are returnees. We're always glad when people feel comfortable and feel like they're going to learn something and they join us repeatedly for our webinars. And for those of you who are here for the first time, I'm really glad you're here, and I hope that you learned something that you can take away and that you can use. My name is Barbara Jennings, and I am a consultant, a human resources consultant here with Towne Benefits. And just my really super quick biography, I did spend over 30 years in human resources management, and I did survive and learned a lot over those 30 years. And I can tell you that much has changed over those decades. I do need to remind you that we are not lawyers. I am not a lawyer, and we are not giving you legal advice here. Sorry about that. Got to get my my mouse finger exercised. Anyway, we're not lawyers, and what I do is I try to take an issue, look at it the way I would address it if I were in the human resources director's shoes, and kind of try to put together a common sense presentation for you all. So please do not ever hesitate to seek legal advice, accounting advice. Some of the topics that we cover today could have a potentially legal or accounting component. So if you need professional help, please by all means seek that help before you get yourselves into trouble. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started with the actual webinar. Now, I put some statistics up here for you. This just in, Film at 11. You know how they do those teasers on your local news every night. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics released its March job openings, and notably, if you're looking at this slide, the quits, the number of people leaving their jobs, increased to about 4.5 million in March, up from 4.4 million in February. That just seems incredible when you think about it. That number of people actually quit their jobs. And the BLS defines that as voluntary separation initiated by the employee. So that doesn't even include layoffs or anything like that. And then secondly, I have a quote by Daniel Zhao, who is an economist at Glassdoor, if you're familiar with Glassdoor, saying that job seekers have more opportunity to go find jobs that pay better, offer better benefits, or quite simply are a better fit. And so you may know from painful experience exactly what these quotes are addressing, because you have lived it over the past couple of years. Now, the Goldman Sachs says that hiring and retaining employees remains the top challenge for small businesses, and that's according to their survey of 1,100 businesses. I did see an interesting thing in the newspaper today that said that both Walmart and Amazon realized that they were actually overstaffed for the first quarter of 2022. But again, you know, they are the behemoths of the commercial world. And so you, particularly those of you in small businesses, are probably continuing to be affected by the number of employees or former employees who are no longer in the job market. And 90% of businesses that are hiring are finding it difficult to recruit qualified candidates for open positions. And that is why we're here today, to talk about what can you do in order to try to better position your company to retain employees and to fill those job openings that come open. Now, when I started planning this webinar, I was very focused on the immediate problem, which was retaining employees. The more I delved into it and the more research I did, I came to recognize what this graphic really does represent, and that is that recruiting and retention are really inextricably linked. If you've got a problem with one, you've almost guaranteed to have a problem with the other. And so, you know, retaining your employees is probably foundational, so that those openings are not created, meaning that you go through fewer recruitment efforts. So I changed my focus, so to speak, and moved it to both recruiting and retention. Now, starting with really the basics. Sorry, I've got a little lag here with my mouse. What is it that employees want? Some of those resignations surely are this sudden massive number of jobs that are open and that become open. And employees look around and think, oh my gosh, I can get $10 more an hour, or I can get some better benefit, so I'm going to jump. Sometimes it turns out probably to be a move that they regret. But generally speaking, there are certain specifics that people want. And honestly, these are things that I want in my own job, and you are probably the same way, that you want these things in your own job. Obviously, you want pay. Obviously, you want benefits. But some of the more, I would say, maybe less tangible things that people want in a job: meaningful work, opportunities for growth, professional, respectful company culture, and now we add to that list the continuation of some of the pandemic perks. A lot of things changed overnight. I think it was March 17th of 2020, and the world has not been the same since then. And so all of these things are things that need to be attended to. And if you've got a weakness somewhere in that little line of things people are looking for, then that is what you need to focus on to try to correct. If you neglect any of these things, that can make it hard to keep the employees that you have, and it can make it hard to hire new employees. Now, there's something I want to talk about here for a minute. A word that you rarely hear in human resources management is creativity, right? I mean, we're focused on analyzing, we're focused on logic, we're focused on laws and obeying laws, and so we turn into very left brain thinkers when it comes to our HR management. And that is really a shame, because in reality, there is all kinds of room for creative thinking in how you solve HR problems. And so I'm going to kind of try to guide you through some of those opportunities to think in a way that's different from the way you normally think of in your human resources work. So don't believe it if somebody says that creativity and HR don't mix, because they absolutely do, and we're going to talk about that as we go along. Now, according to surveys, why employees quit. Pre-pandemic, the number one reason people quit was for more money. The number two reason was because they had a bad boss. You may have heard it said that employees don't quit companies, they quit bosses. So definitely bad bosses have always been an issue, and they absolutely affect your employees who walk out the door. Employees felt like there was too much work, they were stretched too thin. Number four is a toxic culture. We're going to talk about what that means in a few minutes, but a culture that is, let's just say, when your employees come in every morning, they dread walking through the front door because they don't like what they experience during the day in their job. If you have a toxic culture, people like upward mobility. They like knowing that if they do well and they satisfy all of your requirements and they try to improve themselves, that there's going to be a means of them moving up in the, on the job ladder. Number six is being just a cog in a wheel, just feeling like, what, if I walked out of here today, they could replace me with any one of 1,000 people out there. People don't like that sense of, as far as just existing in a job. Now, the pandemic really did shift things, but in some specific ways, I think the pandemic shifted things. You'll see there that money and benefits are still at the top of the list. Sometimes you may read articles saying that money is not a very good motivator, and to some degree that's true. Money is a very personal and emotional topic for people, and so it can both motivate and it can also demotivate. I can show up at work every day and I can be happy, I have a good supervisor, I enjoy the work I'm doing, and I'm happy with the pay that I'm getting, until I discover that the person next to me is making $20 more a week than I am. suddenly money turns into a demotivator. So, money, we've got this really tricky relationship with money, but it definitely is still a driver of employee satisfaction. The second thing that now concerns people is limited advancement opportunities. Again, I don't know if it's because companies eliminated lots of jobs during the pandemic, but that's very much on people's minds, employees' minds right now. Number 3, lack of respect at work. Number 4, now we're sort of getting here into pandemic-specific issues. Ongoing childcare, you may or may not be aware that people are still having issues with their daycare situation. Lack of flexibility at work. If you are in an industry where on March 17th of 2020, you sent everybody home with their computers and everybody worked for the next, 1.5 or 2 years from home, that now translates, if you've called them all back into your workforce, that translates into lack of flexibility. So be aware of that, that's definitely still out there for so many employees. And then employees having to work too many hours. Obviously, if in your industry you have this huge gap, I don't know about you, but I've seen businesses that actually said, we closed early tonight because we didn't have any staff, which is shocking. But what does that do to the other employees that are still there? It often means that they're having to work too many hours and they would rather not be working all of those hours. So what I've done here, I've sorted these things into 4 general categories. So when you think about what may be driving your employees, you are going to look at the money and benefits. You're going to look at the path to professional growth. You're going to look at if you have a negative culture. You're going to look at what type of pandemic hangover you may be experiencing. So we just kind of found it easier to just kind of sort things into that, those 4 categories. All right, now I'm going to show you, anyone here, I don't know if anyone on the line is a baby boomer like me, but if you are a baby boomer, you couldn't graduate from college without being exposed to Abraham Maslow's theory of motivation. It was a very popular idea. I think it came out in like 1943, but I have to be honest with you, it's none the worse for the wear. It's still, in my opinion, has a lot of validity for what drives employees in 2022. What you see there is a pyramid, and at the very bottom, you'll see that the red bar is designated physiological needs: breathing, food, water, shelter, clothing, and that sort of thing. And then you go up that pyramid, and what the deal is the underlying physiological needs are those things that are absolutely essential to life. And as you go up the pyramid, you're not interested in the things on the next level until the preceding levels are satisfied. And you think, well, what does that have to do with my employees? It has really a lot to do with how things motivate your employees. So for example, if you are thinking about, oh my gosh, we're all excited because we're getting everybody a new chair and a new computer, and that's great, and people may really appreciate that. But if you've got employees who are more subsistence level pay rates, so that they may be having a hard time paying the rent or buying food, that is probably not going to motivate those people at all, because right now they don't really care about that. That is going to fall perhaps on another level. So when you think about how to improve your retention and your recruiting, you need to think about what your employees are going to be motivated by. So I thought it was worth sharing Maslow's need hierarchy. Actually, I think it's called the hierarchy of human motivation. Sounds very 1970s, doesn't it? All right, so before I delve too deeply into kind of things that you can do to help your company improve in the recruiting and retention area, I just think probably the most important starting place is going to be to understand where you are. And as I go through this, I can only picture some eye rolls, if you know what I mean. It's like, okay, we have to undertake this formal program to assess where we are, who has time for that? And I understand exactly where you're coming from. It's always hard to work anything else into your day. And I also know that in HR, a lot of times you're sort of up against upper level management who may be primarily focused on the bottom line. They may be focused on getting the job done, profitability, return on shareholders' equity, that sort of thing. And so sometimes HR just kind of has to try to do it on their own. And I know that that is really difficult. And my sympathy is with you, because I'm sure many people out here are still trying to recover from the impact of the pandemic on their business. But remember that everything that I am going to share with you here, it doesn't mean you have to run out and do all this stuff. It just means to kind of think about, how would I plan if I were to, undertake a better recruiting program or a better retention program. So the first place is really assess where everything stands right now. And this is all a little bit technical. Sorry, I'm still going through my lag. Oops, I don't know if you're seeing what I'm seeing, but I've got parts of 2 slides on here. Bear with me for a minute, and I will go backwards, and I will try to go forward again. Take an opportunity to take a little swig of my tea. All right, well, maybe it's going to slowly join us here today. I'm sorry, it looks like I felt when I got out of bed this morning. All right, assessing where things stand. If you have historical data, it might be helpful to you to calculate your annual turnover rate for the past few years, realizing that 20 and 21 are probably going to skew things if you're starting in like 18, 19, 20, 21, and now 22. The formula for assessing your turnover rate is to divide your number of separations by your head count of employees, multiply that times 100. You might want to take December 31st payroll and just kind of scan it, look at it, do that quick calculation. And you might have a 7% turnover rate. You might have a 20% turnover rate, which would be pretty high, but that does vary from industry to industry. So maybe just do that quick calculation and jot out 5 years of turnover rates. Secondly, assessing where you stand. It's always helpful to compare yourself to other companies. So I would recommend that you consider joining a professional association for your industry. Compare your company to industry averages as far as turnover, benefits, etc. Over the course of my career, I was a member, because I was a human resources director at a bank. I was a member of the Virginia Bankers Association. Then when I moved to HR at a large law firm, I joined the Association of Legal Administrators, and both of those professional associations had just a wealth of data and information on, company averages, what's normal or average in your industry. Then you're going to need to take a look at your pay structure. Pay structures have probably had a lot of pressure over the past 2 years. And so it's good to know, or do a formal look at your pay structure and see what are your drivers of pay increases and salary changes and that sort of thing. Then put together a little chart of benefits that you currently offer. Just, that shouldn't be too hard for most people to just kind of make a list of all the benefits that your employees have access to. Then make a list of your social media outlets that your company uses. How often do you use them? How do you use them? And, in this brave new world that we live in, it seems weird to think about social media as, a recruiting tool or a retention tool. But I don't think most companies need to add a bunch of social media outlets to what they've already got, but to make sure that you're using your social media outlets effectively. I think you should take a look at your social media outlets. All right, and then there's this thing called a SWOT analysis, SWOT, analyzing your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and threats. This is another traditional tool that goes back to the 60s that, again, in my career, we grew up doing SWOT analyses, and I believe many companies still do them. It's very, very helpful in putting together a snapshot of where your company stands in certain areas. And then the last And maybe the most important is to develop a plan to talk to your employees. There's so many means of getting employee feedback, and it's just a wealth of information out there, and your employees are usually very willing to answer questions that you have and try to help out. So think of them as a resource and use your employees as a source of aid. And I'm sorry, we may be having this. Oh, okay, that wasn't so bad. All right, so your state of the company report. If you've gathered those pieces of information, and how do you use those things? Well, if it were me, I would do a page summary, a 2-page summary of where you stand. Looking at your turnover trend, has your company been stable? Have things been higher or lower recently as far as your turnover? Just looking at that so you have that information that, ooh, I don't see, this is a disturbing trend. For 4 out of the last 5 years, our turnover rate has been higher. Or, wow, we've really done remarkably well, and we have been able to hang on to people, and we haven't had to fill that many positions. Next, analyze or look at your pay structure. Where do you see hazards? And things to consider would be, are your new employee salaries encroaching on longer term employee salaries? That was always a challenge for me, that seemed to be a common thread in all of my years in HR, was the cost of hiring new employees for some reason always seemed to be pushing up from the bottom, so to speak, on our long-term employee salaries. I know there's a saying out there that is, let's see, the only way to move up is to move out. And a lot of employees have that sense that if I want to keep growing in my salary, I'm going to have to leave and go to a new company. Do you see any discriminatory patterns? That's something that obviously, again, I'm going back to the right brain, left brain thinking. Us HR people are always on the lookout, or actually should be always on the lookout for any discriminatory patterns to see where, I may be out of whack as far as suddenly are my younger employees flirting with the salaries of my older employees? Are men making more money than women? Is there any racially based or, that appears to be discriminatory, which again, none of this stuff may actually be discriminatory, but that's always something you should have your little antenna up to want to identify. If you have peer salary information, are your salaries slipping for your industry? Are you locked into across the board pay increases? I mean, that is like, I think, a dinosaur kind of question. I think most people have probably left the lockstep pay increases behind because of all sorts of external factors and some internal factors. But that's maybe something to try to get away from if you are still operating in that mode. Have salary crises skewed your salary ranges? I mean, in this last 2 years of upheaval, it's possible that you have good employees that come into your office and say, hey, you know what, I got a job offer that was 10,000 more than I'm making here. Is there anything you can do about that? And in some cases, you're lucky if they come and talk to you first, because a lot of times they'll just give you a notice and leave. So that is something to think about if salary crises have skewed your salary ranges. Honestly, sometimes you have to do what you have to do. But if you do a crisis increase, you then might want to take a look at what has that done or potentially done to your whole array of salary ranges. Okay, we're going to continue on with our kind of state of the company report. Make your list of your benefits. I like to separate the monetary value with the non-monetary value, because here's the thing. I was talking about creativity a few minutes ago. Sometimes you just can't be creative with the monetary stuff, right? You're limited. You have a budget, maybe next year, but a lot of times there are non-monetary benefits that you can throw people's way. And again, going back to talking to your employees, you can perhaps find out what would have value to people. as far as additional benefits. So, segregate those two, monetary and non-monetary, and that the wiggle room, so to speak, may be in those non-monetary values. Assign the dollar values where you can to the cost to employees and also the benefit to employees, like their health insurance, the value in the case of vacation, sick leave, PTO. This kind of feeds right into the idea of preparing salary and benefit statements for people each year to put on paper all of the pay that people received and then the value of all the benefits that they received so that people can see. A lot of times employees will leave out the value of their health insurance. I was helping somebody yesterday try to make a decision between moving off of a group health plan onto Medicare, and I was doing a comparison of the benefits that they have and the cost of the benefits. And it was so shocking to me, which will not be shocking to you if you administer your benefits, at how much your company is paying toward people's health insurance and their dental insurance and that sort of thing. So if your employees are not aware of how much money you're spending, it might be good to help them to be aware. And one way to do that is to show it to them on a graph and a statement that is, a salary and benefits statement. Okay, now with your social media outlets, I would list them. How often do you post things? What kind of content do you post? You don't necessarily need more of the outlets, but maybe just attempt to beef up your usage more effectively. And actually, probably a lot of it, companies, nobody's really measuring the effectiveness of their social media posting. One way that occurred to me recently about kind of where the intersection of social media and employee culture intersect, a company that's very near and dear to me, I saw on their website this past week, I think it was, where they had put on Facebook and asked their employee to post a photograph of their pet. And I just thought that was a neat little way to connect people. And so I really enjoyed scrolling through and seeing all the employees' pets. And you could tell that those who posted it had meaning to them because they would put little things like, this is JoJo Smith doing what he loves best, and the dog is eating or something like that. So, gosh, I was surprised at the number of people who posted photos of their pets. So, that is a little tiny piece of a big day, but it may just be one little thing that makes people feel like the employer cares about them and just a fun thing to do. So anyway, so that's a very small way that you can make use of your social media outlet. Now, when it comes to recruiting, you can use social media to put your recruiting efforts out there. We have job openings and that sort of thing. So there are really a lot of good ways to utilize your social media outlets. All right, and then we get into your SWOT analysis. If you all, those of you who've done this chart should sort of look familiar. You have a box for your employees' strengths, not employees, your company's strengths, its weaknesses, its opportunities, and its threats. And so I've tried to list things that if you're not familiar with this analysis, that might help you understand what each box stands for. So like your company's strengths, I just made up a company and I made up their strengths, but you would list things like where are we strong? This company had talented employees. Employees have a lot of strong depth of knowledge. Your competitive pay structure works to your advantage right now, and you're lucky to have low turnover. Okay, but no company is perfect, right? So every company is going to have weaknesses. So this company is concerned that maybe on the benefits side, they're falling behind their competitors. They're very traditional in the benefits they offer. They're not thinking creatively, perhaps. When they do have to replace employees, it takes way too long to find new people. The company tends to be reactive rather than proactive. So, for example, they might have missed an opportunity to take on a new product because they took too long to analyze whether it would be a good thing for them to do so. and they didn't have people up and trained and ready. So on their opportunities box on the lower left, you think about what opportunities does your business have, just kind of globally and specifically related to human resources. Innovations create additional product line for this company. They can sell because new products are coming out on the market. That gives us an opportunity to, beef up our product line. However, we do need to train our employees when we do increase our product line, or we need, in anticipation, we need to do employee training on these. An influx of consumers into our area, maybe we need to think about considering an increase in our sales force. So those are opportunities for our business. Now, what are the threats to our business? They could be outside threats. They can be inside threats. An outside threat might be a new competitor has just entered our market. I didn't think to put that in this box, but I like that because that's certainly a threat. Some employees resist technology and change. That can be a threat. And if you had seen me trying to set up this webinar, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. I am not the best at the technology. Historically low unemployment may be putting pressure on our salaries, and some key employees are nearing retirement. So that gives you a snapshot kind of where things are, and some areas that you need to think about improving might pop out at you when you look at it this way. And again, believe me that I do not underestimate the amount of time you have available and the amount of time that you have to put into a project like this. So if you can't do everything at the depth that I've put on here, I would say at least do a SWOT analysis. At least sit down and look at those things, because some of these other issues can kind of pop out in that SWOT analysis. All right, so what's the next logical step? I hope that you're all still with me here, and I hope that you're following and making some notes and maybe thinking about ways that you can, my apologies, I think I beamed myself forward. I left out the most important part, talking to your employees in a meaningful way. You know how communication in companies most frequently flows in one direction. Generally speaking, probably 80% of your communication flows from the top down. Your employees can tell you an awful lot about your company if you ask them. So you have to figure out how to talk to your employees. This can be very much culturally based. Depends on your business, depends on your company, depends on your industry. But some of these things that I've listed here maybe have some possibilities for you. You have employee surveys that you can do. SurveyMonkey makes it fairly easy to create your own. You have to think carefully, and the internet is a wealth of information on how to ask good questions. Also, depending on the trust level within your company, you may want to consider having a third party conduct and administer a survey. Again, internet has lots of companies that are willing to do this for you. If you want to do your own, or actually either way, you don't want to send out your employees a survey that has 25 questions and each one has a comment box after it. I don't know about you, but the last 15 years or so, I've kind of burned out on surveys of all sorts. You know, I go to the doctor, they send me a survey. I buy a car, they send a survey. I have my oil changed, they send a survey. So, you know, the market is flooded with surveys, but you want to get meaningful information. So I would say 5 to 10 easy questions like, can you think of, or is there any benefit that you would like to recommend to us? Do you, and again, third party, or you doing this, if you're asking about the quality of their employment experience, like, do they like their boss? Do they have issues with their boss, other employees? That may be an area where they would be fearful that you could find out who did this, and you want to protect the anonymity of a survey. You know, what do you think of our employment evaluation process, and solicit their comments. One thing you've got to do when you do employee surveys is you have to be prepared for them to answer the survey. And that means that some people are going to give you negative information. Sometimes that information is stuff that you should know about. Sometimes it may be unfair what they have to say, but you have to take everything with a grain of salt and not like get offended if an employee is honest with you. So that's one way of soliciting information from employees, is to conduct a survey. Recently, there's this concept of stay interviews. Everybody's heard of exit interviews, right? I would highly recommend that you do exit interviews when people leave. But the idea of a stay interview is to touch base with all of your employees one-on-one, have a little conversation about what motivates you when you walk in the door at work each day. Is your work setting agreeable? You know, is your lighting good? Do you like, is your desk, chair, that sort of stuff? How do you feel about your compensation? Now, this is going to open a door. If you go down the compensation road, it's going to open the door to things that you wish you could unhear. But in any of these tools, you need to make it clear that we greatly value your input. Obviously, people are going to make suggestions and we're not going to be able to do everything, but we do want to know what you have to say. And if you in HR cannot do such an interview, because obviously if you spend 15 minutes with every person in your facility, Lord, that's going to be an awful lot of interviews. Train your supervisors to do the interviews and get them to sit down with their employees and talk about things that may encourage people to stay. It will give your employees the sense that you care about their input and that you want them to stay with your firm. Another idea would be to form employee focus groups where you have a short-term need. I did this years ago in a company where we revamped our performance evaluation form. It occurred to me that people grumble a lot about their employee eval process. I thought, how can I improve that situation? So I thought, you know what? I'm going to ask the employees to design the new form. And so we had a focus group. There were a couple of people that I specifically wanted to be on that team. And I'll be honest with you, I picked one of our most vociferous complainers about everything. I thought, maybe if I put her on the team, she will embrace this new performance form. And then I randomly picked other people out of a hat. And I think I had about 8 employees. And we sat there and we had meetings over the course of a month where we took our old form. Once a week, we met and talked about how we could do a new form. We ended up developing a new form, and it went over pretty well. But, you know, everything has a lifespan, right? So I'm thinking probably within 5 or 6 years, we had to go through that process all over again. But it was a good 5 or 6 years because we had far fewer complaints about the form. Publish a newsletter. Now, this is still sort of top-down communication, but I'm thinking in terms of communicating with people. If you publish a newsletter, you're letting people know things, you know, goings on about the company. Are we starting a new office? Have we hired new employees? We can put their names and their functions in this thing. Sometimes, depending on the culture of your business, you can put birthday celebrations, you know, marriages, new grandbabies, and all sorts of things like that. People like hearing about each other. And so a newsletter that's kind of geared to what employees might like to know might be a good start. Establish a useful intranet. If you have most companies, probably larger companies, have intranets for their employees' use. An intranet, and I'm going to talk in a few minutes about QR codes. If you know what quick response codes are, if you don't know that name, you'll know it when you see it, because I have a slide that includes a QR code. You can use QR codes to get people interested in your intranet, and you can play games. You can provide employees like a the first one there gets a prize kind of thing, or reward people for going to your intranet. So there's all sorts of technology uses that you can get out of your intranet. Form an employee council. Now, before when I talked about focus groups are more like ad hoc things where you have a purpose, and then when that purpose is complete, your focus group goes away. An employee council is a tool where and this can be popularly elected by employees. You can take it by department so that each department has a representative on the council. And every quarter you meet for lunch, and the employee council brings forward things that may be going on in their department that you might want to know about. They can meet with their department in the week before they have a council meeting and solicit input from all of their peers in their department, and then bring that forward to the employee council. And again, you make it clear that we're going to hear a lot of stuff, and we can't solve every problem, but that we want to hear what you have to say, because it's very helpful in giving us guidance in what's important to you all. Have a good old-fashioned suggestion box. Maybe not a physical box, but periodically an email that you send around saying, hey, we've realized that we have had an issue with mice. We want to know, we want you to help us. Does anybody have a suggestion on a company that might help us out with our mice problem? Or that's kind of silly, but something like that. Just get, again, a small way to have a little bit of input from your employees. And I know there are plenty of others, but I think those are some good starts on talking to people. I would absolutely never try to do all of those things, but I would pick maybe 2 and see if you can implement 2 of those. All right, next, we're going to try to address the HR manager's dilemma. You may have heard this many times, that there's never enough time to do things right, but we always have enough time to do things over. So I'm trying to encourage you to do what you can do proactively rather than reactively. And this is just a little graphic that talks about successful recruiting and retention, and your culture, your pay and benefits, and your job opportunities kind of all work together in that little funnel to come down to giving you an improved recruiting and retention program. All right, now that, sorry, I think I may have, thought I skipped a slide again. Identifying your weak points in the post-pandemic period, there's heightened sensitivity to pay, benefits, flexibility, and the quality of company culture. And unfortunately, you may have fewer candidates than you need, and you probably have more competition for candidates than you need. So what's an HR manager to do? I'm going to recap those places that you need to look at most carefully. And really, your goal should be to be an employer of choice. That is an employer that people know about, and they know you're a good employer, and they think of you when they think about, I'm thinking about switching jobs. I think I'm going to look at this employer because I've heard good things about them. A place where your current people want to stay, and a place where people who don't work there would like to be. So the areas where you probably have the most exposure, people like good leadership, they like competitive pay, they like to be engaged with their work and to work with engaged people. They like meaningful work, and they like an appealing company culture. So when you're identifying or creating goals, keep your goals simple and keep them realistic. Start small, 2 goals this year, and that's all I can handle. So identify, make it count. Identify good places to begin to develop goals. It's okay to have primary goals and secondary goals. Sometimes it's like your wish list. I'd really like to have these, but if I could, I'd also like these. Whenever you start talking about new programs, design those things carefully, because new benefits, suddenly you're talking to your employees more. Pay structures, you need to make certain that you can follow through on whatever it is you plan to do. And it's better to offer no new plan than a plan that goes south. that is definitely not good. All right, so on the next few slides, you're going to see the titles of those. Where it applies to recruiting and retention, I just put R&R. So whether you're recruiting, whether you're working on retention, you need to start at the beginning, which is your job descriptions. They are kind of the lifeblood of your HR program. Everybody needs a job description. They should be reviewed annually, if at all possible. Make sure they're current. Find them as necessary based on your company analysis. Your job descriptions are critical to both recruiting and retention. Every employee should have access to their job description. Everyone that you interview should be given a job description. One thing that helps with is your Americans with Disabilities Act accommodations, is so that people you're interviewing, candidates, would have the opportunity to see your central functions, and if they've got a disability issue, to address that early on. Incorporate anything that you may have learned from your employees when you were in your assessment stage into your revamping or just reviewing your job descriptions. All right, now this is recruiting specifically, and I'll tell you, this is where you can let your creativity run wild. And I'm saying creativity, I'm not going to think you're going to be out there writing haiku poems or anything like that, but to be creative about getting the word out there. Obviously, your direct ads, those are your traditional means of posting jobs, whether it's job boards, recruiting sites, your own website, industry publications, all kinds of places out there that you can just put a direct ad and it will be seen by a certain number of people. As you know, job boards tend to yield just tons of resumes. So, you know, you might want to think more carefully about some of these other means as well. Your social media, put yourself out there on Facebook, put it out there on LinkedIn, put it out there on Twitter, what you're looking for, job description, where you're located. You know, if it's a means or a channel where you can give descriptions of our area. For example, if you attract people from outside of the Hampton Roads or Richmond or wherever you're listening from, build up your geographic area about all the cool stuff that we have to offer people that may be thinking about living here. You may attract some good people from outside of the area. Networking, make sure that you tell your employees that the job is open, and honestly, down a little ways, I've got promotions and transfers from within. If at all possible, post your jobs internally and see if you've got some internal candidate that could fill that role. And again, that creates a second problem for you, which means that now you'll have a different job that you need to fill if you promote someone from within. But do not let that be a barrier to allowing some person who is capable and willing to take a job internally. College alumni boards. You should, if I were you, I would call the what is it called? The department that deals with placement, the placement area of your local colleges. Probably almost everybody who's listening on here has a college or university very close by. People that work for those colleges are often very interested in talking to employers, and they may be able to even give you some creative ideas on how you can reach their alumni. So I would establish a relationship, and actually in my former job, I actually did have a relationship with universities and colleges around the whole state, where I would routinely post things on those job boards. Job fairs, you can create your own virtual job fair if you want. You can hear about other job fairs that you have the opportunity to participate in, either in person. I'm guessing that they're doing job fairs again in person. I'm getting my coworker who's here listening with me is shaking her head yes, that they are doing in-person job fairs again. Consider that route. Employee referrals. If someone knows a good candidate, by all means, consider paying them a bonus. And I mean, it should be probably something meaningful, like perhaps a $500 bonus when you hire the person they referred, and then 6 months later, another $500 when the new employee has had 6 successful months with your company. Promotions and transfers from inside. You can always prevent an employee from moving up in your company, but you cannot prevent an employee from moving out of your company. So if people are worth hanging on to, you might want to consider promotions and transfers from inside. Something called ongoing candidate relationship management. I'm going to go into that in detail in a minute, but just be aware that that's a thing and that it's out there, and it's a good way to potentially hire or staff positions. Be creative. Think about other means of getting the word out there. And I'm going to, the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the creative end of recruiting. Be sensitive to your wording. Remember that, yes, we want to be creative. Yes, we want to fill our jobs, but no, we don't want to be discriminatory. So whether it's a disability, whether it's age, whether it's race, ethnicity, whatever it is, be sensitive to what you say, what your employees say, and that sort of thing, and the ads that you run as far as making sure you don't discriminate. All right, now I mentioned a few minutes ago QR codes, and I think most of you are probably familiar. Certainly we've all seen that little box in the lower left. It has the boxes and the black and white. That's a QR code, a quick response code. And check that out. This is a real ad for a real company. And what that does is there are QR code apps out there that you can subscribe to where you can create your own QR code. So for example, that one that's showing up there, I believe it links right to that company's employment page, right to the application, so that if I just happen to see that, like I'm riding a bus in Manhattan, and up ahead, up above me, I see this ad, and I'm like, oh, they're hiring. I can just click on it with my phone, and it will take me right into that page. So as I'm finishing my bus ride, I can sit there and scroll through this company's website and see if I like what I see as far as their job posting. So QR codes can direct employees to specific areas of the company intranet. It can direct, you can use it internally. It can direct your employees to your benefits page during open enrollment. You could send that out, distribute that QR code to all your employees, and then they could go just directly into the benefits section of your website. It can direct applicants to the employment benefits or application area. And here's some things I've heard about. QR code on your business card that goes directly to your website. So when you distribute your business, or you know, have two business cards, one for your like peer group that you might mix and mingle with, one with a broader area that where you might, you know, develop some interest on behalf of people that you'd never just walk up to and say, hey, do you know anybody we could hire? QR code right now on a business card is probably an up and coming thing. So it may be something that distinguishes you from others. Talk about getting creative. I mentioned those placement offices in colleges or universities. One thing that you could ask them is, look, we're looking to hire people. We need engineers. We need nurses. We need whatever. Near your campus, is there a coffee shop that's frequented by a lot of students? And if so, do you think there'd be any benefit to us going to the coffee shop, putting some business cards out there that have our QR codes on there and say, now hiring, ask the coffee shop owner if they would let us put that, you know, on the counter? Somebody in the placement office may be able to give you some direction on ways to increase your visibility among a population that may be qualified and looking for jobs. So when I say be creative, I'm not joking. I've got an article here that I'm reaching for. There was a guy named Jonathan. Oh, in fact, his name was Jonathan Swift. I'm sorry, you know, that's an author from many years ago, right? Probably his real name. He printed up leaflets that says, hello, I'm Jonathan. And he included on his leaflet a QR code that linked to his LinkedIn profile. And then he went to the companies where he wanted to work and put these flyers on the cars of what looked like the executive group. Now, you can think that might really turn some people off, because I hate going out and finding flyers on my car, but stick it under the windshield wiper. However, Jonathan said he just wanted to make sure that recruiters saw his job application. And believe it or not, the hiring manager at that company saw it. He said he used the word unignorable. He could not ignore it. And he ended up interviewing Jonathan Swift and hiring him. So that is just a real life example of how the sky is the limit with the use of technology in recruiting and hiring. So hopefully that may give you some inspiration on ways to think about things. Okay, interviewing is up next. So when you're recruiting, one thing you might consider doing is doing a pre-screening telephone interview for the purpose of communicating anything that may be non-negotiable. Like if you have a salary ceiling and there's no way you can go above that, or let's say you are requiring people to work on site 5 days a week, you cannot have work at home, then call good candidates and go over those 2 questions before you start making in-house interviews, people to come in, or before you schedule an hour to talk to somebody over WebEx. Because you can, if you know that you're not going to meet the salary requirement, if you know there's no way you can give in on the remote, then you can thank them for their time and appreciate their interest and move on down the road. Now, you don't want to get too deeply into an interview just over the phone, because sometimes that can raise, if you interview some people in person and you interview some people over the phone, you could have discrimination issues that arise. But certainly getting out of the way those non-negotiables saves time for everybody. Don't drag out the process. You may have had the experience already over the pandemic of taking too long to get back to somebody and get them in for a second interview, particularly when you're in a hot industry and you know that 10 other companies in this area are also recruiting people. You need to be prepared to try to get that all taken care of right away. If you feel like in one day you really like this person, you haven't had a chance to do the background check, etc., you can make an offer that's going to be contingent on a successful background check. So that way, that leaves you an out if things don't come back, the way you'd like them to. The candidate may have several other offers before you get back to them. To me, it's good practice to follow up with everyone you interview. I'm not talking about everyone from whom you receive a resume. I'm talking about if you actually take a person's time and you talk to them on the phone, in person or by Zoom or however you do it. I think they deserve at least an email explaining that we had a better candidate and we thank you so much for your interest. And then not burn that bridge by just acting like they don't count or they don't matter, because that is not a good sign to be getting out there to people that you're trying to recruit. Onboarding, this is just really a cursory attention to onboarding, which could be a webinar all by itself. Your webinar, your onboarding, your training, and your orientation really are the first impressions that can last over the entire relationship. So you need to be thorough, break up your onboarding and your orientation into sections. Don't expect people to sit and do computer-based training for 8 hours their first day. Let them have a lot of interaction, perhaps a luncheon to meet their coworkers. Just any human touch you can give it, but do be thorough. Consider assigning your new hires a mentor if that works in your industry or in your company. And please don't ever put a new employee in the position of having to wander around and try to find the bathroom or the kitchen. The coffee and the bathroom are 2 very important things to new employees. All right, now we get into pay. And this is another place where you can use your creativity. believe it or not, when it comes to pay. And this isn't, when people start talking pay and benefits, the HR director, radar, your alarm systems start going off, because you know how careful you have to be in all aspects of your pay, whether it's careful because of your bottom line, the impact it has on other employees, the impact it has on discriminatory practices, and that sort of thing. But really, you do have a lot of creative ability here. Use available tools to determine what your pay system should look like. Do you have industry benchmarks? If you talk to your employees, what did you learn? When you talk to a departing employee, what did you learn from that employee? What are candidates asking for now? So I'm guessing that there's some inflation happening now, because candidates may perceive that, hey, this is a great time to get a significant bump in the compensation, and so they're going to ask for more than what they realistically expected they would get 2 years ago. What are employees saying at raise time? You can't always bank on that, but certainly it's worth noting and keeping track of. What have you offered employees who've indicated they might leave for more pay? Have you done the crisis offer? And if so, how much have you had to pay to get somebody to stay? What's the scuttlebutt in your peers in your industry? What are they saying about what they're having to pay? What are other companies' job postings saying? A lot of them now, it's interesting because in some state, well, maybe New York is leading the way on this, but there seems to be a momentum toward disclosing pay in job ads. And I believe New York and maybe California, you are required to disclose pay in job ads. So for people in those areas, that's going to be a wealth of information that's just sitting out there waiting to be accumulated by their competitors. Let's see. Now, here are just some more creative ideas about your pay as far as things you might consider when you're talking about your pay structure. Salary and benefits, hands down, is usually the greatest cost of doing business for any company. And the last 2 years have been a shock to the system of most companies trying to keep their salaries competitive. So here are some ideas that you may consider. And once again, please don't run out there and throw 5 new pay practices at employees and see what sticks. That does not work very well. Better to have one phased in additional compensation consideration than things that are not going to work in the long run. If you don't already do bonuses, that's something to consider. Profit sharing bonus is an idea, team productivity bonus, that sort of thing. Offer pay increases as a lump sum payment instead of paying that out over the course of 24 pay periods or 52 pay periods. Let's say you're going to increase somebody's pay by $3,000 for the next year. Offer them a lump sum, and it may be appealing to them to get, let's say, a $2,200 lump payment than it might be to have it parsed out. Also, if you do lump sum increase, it doesn't affect that automatic acceleration is not built in next year if you go back to the standard way of doing it and you give them a percentage of pay as their increase. That year's increase is not included in their base salary for the next year. Consider offering reduced work hours in lieu of a pay increase. So for some employees, maybe some people would like to work 4 8-hour days and take a corresponding reduction in pay. Or if it's a new hire, you don't have a reduction going on, you just have a lower starting salary because they're only working 32 hours a week. Do something like increasing their paid time off in lieu of a higher salary. Some people might actually like that. If you have the ability to do an employee stock ownership plan, this is usually smaller companies, but some big companies, you can consider doing that in lieu of paying money. Pay a periodic out of the blue thank you bonus that nobody's expecting. the advantage there, and I would not key a thank you bonus to the end of the year. I would can do it, you know, at some random time, like July the 1st. We're just going to give everybody $500. And you're thinking, wow, that's a lot of money. That's true, but it may be money well spent, and just say thanks for all you've done. This has been a great, you know, so far we've had a great year. Let's see what else we can say about that. Team bonuses. I think I mentioned that a minute ago. Pay your teams for their productivity. Pay meaningful recruiting bonuses. I've already talked about that. Start an employee recognition program that's tied to meaningful cash and prizes. You know, and I think I mentioned employee of the month in a minute, but yeah, that was probably never a good idea, employee of the month, because it's too hard to sustain. You know how fast months go by. But something that maybe builds up to an annual big grand prize. So every month you get your employees to put people's names in for a particular thing they did that month and how it helped client service. And then every month you give out a little award to all the people, or, you know, the top 3 people that got nominated by their peers. And then at the end of the year, you take all of those winners and maybe put their names in a hat and you pick the big winner or something, and they get $500 or $1,000 and a title like, I don't know, employee of the year, team member of the year, or something like that. So, you know, but in my opinion, it needs to be something that people would value, meaningful. Institute a student loan payback assistance program. Now, there is a specific way you can do this that's tax favored, and there are people who may find it better to have some of their student loans paid back than to get other types of benefits. So this is something that if you have a lot of younger people, particularly in the educated, you know, like engineers, nurses, that sort of thing, that are coming out of college with big student debt, that might be something that would be very viable for your organization. Pay a first home buying bonus. If you've got an employee who's buying a home for the first time, set up some type of home buying bonus and pay them $1,000 bonus for buying a house. You know, that's just a little way to say we care about you, we're glad you're here, we hope you stick with us, because that certainly you'll get goodwill credit for that. And again, any of these bonuses, except perhaps that like random thank you bonus, probably needs to have an explanation in your employee handbook so that people can see that it's out there. Pay a bonus for completing a qualified education program. Many companies already do this, that if your person or your people get some particular degree or something, then they get money for that. Sky is the limit when it comes to developing creative pay schemes, but keep these things in mind. Many or most of the time when you pay cash money out, there's going to be some taxable benefit to some, requirement to somebody. Okay, so be aware of that most of these things don't go untaxed. Some of these ideas are going to need the input of an accountant or a lawyer to help you develop them. Some you will need to scrutinize your pay practices for potential discrimination as you try to, you know, give people incentives on things. You have to be mindful of the way you give out money. Now, don't forget Maslow's need hierarchy. Future bonus that has to be earned and is not guaranteed is not going to be as motivating to an employee who's just scraping by as it might be to an employee who is earning enough to live comfortably. So know your audience, know your recipients before you commit to a creative pay structure. Gear it to what you think is going to be meaningful to your employees. All right, now what about benefits? What can we do about employee benefits? Some benefits have legislative and tax requirements. Others, you know, like the Affordable Care Act, you have to keep things in mind when you're talking about messing with health insurance. But in other cases, again, you can be as creative as you want to be to customize some of your benefits specifically to your workplace. I mean, look at that cute little face on the slide. Whoever would have thought that having pets at work would be a thing, and yet there are companies that do that. One thing I remembered overnight was that a friend of mine who used to work in Manhattan, she worked for a small some type of like graphic design firm. I think they might have had 15 or 16 employees. As a benefit to all their employees, every single day, the company bought lunch for the employees. And so the first thing in the morning, when you would come in, there would be your email, and it would say, you know, today we're going to Tony's Pizza. Here's their menu. And you make your selection. You have to have your selection in by 10 a.m. and then by 12:30, voila, there in the big conference room is lunch for everybody that ordered. If you wanted to sit in the big conference room, the doors were locked and the phones were put on night ring. If you wanted to sit in and just have a good time with everybody while you ate your lunch for an hour, you could do that. You know, it's not required. You didn't have to participate. You could go back to your office if you wanted to. But unbelievably, that was a massive benefit in that company. And everybody just loved it. And what they would do is the employees would come and give menus to various restaurants around town. So, you know, it was always, you never knew what you were going to get. And anyway, everybody really liked it. So that's, when I say creative thinking, that's kind of what I'm talking about. Something that may appear to be small, but which may have big meaning. So you've got your standard traditional benefits. I'm sorry, I've got my little lag going here. I'm seeing one slide, there it is. I'm not going to go down this list. You know about all of these things, but I do have a couple that I thought I would just kind of bring to your attention. And I'm going to start from the bottom. A sabbatical. What is a sabbatical? It is technically it's from the root word that means, I think, to rest. Where you give, it's been very popular in the academic community for many, many years. College professors have earned sabbaticals at some point in their career. On a smaller scale, in a regular company, it might be something that you would say, you know what, when you've hit your 5th anniversary, you get a month off to go do something that you've always wanted to do. And you give them their pay for the month. I mean, if you're really generous, you can pay for a trip somewhere or something. But the idea of being able to take a month off because I've always wanted to go to Europe or go to Antarctica or whatever it is you've always wanted to do. So, you know, yes, that has a cost, absolutely does. But it is one thing that the fact that it has a longevity requirement tied to it, think about how much it costs you every time you have to replace an employee. So if it ties some employees to you for 5 years, well, you've saved all that money over the course of 5 years when you didn't have to recruit for those positions. Some companies offer housing, believe it or not. I was reading about some ski in Aspen, I think, where the companies that run the ski operations, housing is extremely expensive up there. So, hey, they've just built a bunch of apartments and they rent them to their employees at a very low rate. So that's a big competitive advantage over those areas that do not provide housing for their employees. Daycare, you might consider on-site. Obviously, that's not practical for small companies, but some large companies do on-site daycare or daycare subsidies, or having a Section 125 plan where people can do pre-tax daycare costs reimbursed. We've talked about recruiting bonuses a couple of times. Let's go up to emergency savings plans. I'm not sure if I've got the exact dollar figure correct, but I believe there have been studies that have shown that the average American cannot cover a $400 emergency expense. They'd have to use a credit card to pay that. Consider some way that you might be able to assist employees in accumulating an emergency savings money. Not sure exactly how this works, but I have read of companies doing this, just so that they've got money sitting out there in order to be able to meet, a tire blowout or the refrigerator dies or something like that. They would have assistance toward being able to do that without a credit card. So that's all I'm going to cover about your intangible ideas about additional intangible benefits. I thought I had printed out something about some interesting, sorry, bear with me here for just a second. Oh yeah, here we go. sorry, I walk into this conference room with stacks of paper with cool things I've seen that I want to share. Here's some ideas that some other companies have put up, have implemented. Giving people a vacation stipend so that they can use the money when they take a vacation. Enabling people to take time off to do volunteer work. Donation matching, where the company agrees to match if the employee makes a contribution to some specified nonprofits, then the company will match their contributions. Helping employees pay for fertility treatments or adoption costs. We talked about repaying student loans. A nap room or a quiet room where employees can just kind of get away from it all for a while. Summer hours, maybe working a half day every other Friday, something like that, or casual dress on Fridays. On their own, none of those are really huge benefits, but all the things that you do collectively just could give you a slight competitive edge when it comes to attracting and retaining your employees. Now, the things with no monetary benefit, you know a lot of these already, so I'm not going to read down that list, but I am going to say, I'm sorry about the quality of this. There we go, it's straightening out. One thing that I would highlight would be educational seminars. Those either are no cost or very low cost, where you bring in specialists maybe twice a year, 3 times a year, to talk to your employees about things they might have an interest in, like, you know, better nutrition, how to have a lawyer in to talk about how to develop a will or a trust, talk to them about Medicare. And, you know, even if your employees are all young, they may have a parent who is of Medicare age that, you know, might benefit. And, you know, you can invite the family members in if you want to hear these educational seminars. You know, a financial planning seminar, one on saving for retirement, and that you can kind of use doubly to show how retirement planning and your 401k kind of dovetail, and get a financial planner in to talk to your employees about that. I think that companies get a lot of positive mileage out of doing just, you know, small stuff like that for their employees. And I certainly, I'll do a little commercial here for Towne Benefits. We do offer Medicare seminars for your employees, and we do have agents that can come to your site to talk to your employees about Medicare, if that would ever be one you'd be interested in. Now, let's talk about the continuation of pandemic-related perks. During the pandemic, employees discovered that they really liked not having to commute. They like flexibility that working from home gives them, and they don't want to go back in the office full time. I've read several articles recently where companies who worked from home successfully are requiring their employees to come back in full time, and how it's very probable that that is putting those companies at a competitive disadvantage. So in other words, if I'm considering 2 job offers, one allows me to work from home full time, the other one requires me to come in full time, all other things being equal, I will go with the one that's work from home. And many employees are feeling that way. So I would encourage you, if there's any way that you can even have a hybrid setup, so that 3 days a week in the office, 2 days a week from home, that may, you know, that may get you so far. But definitely people like the idea, most people, now as you can see that Gallup poll, 90% of employees who work from home want to continue doing so, at least part-time. 54% would actually like a hybrid arrangement, because they like being in the office, and they like, you know, periodically being with their peers, and you know, having meetings and having, you know, kind of fun times together with the people that they've been missing for so long. Now, last word of advice on the benefits is going to be, don't just throw a bunch of new benefits at employees too much too fast. Number one, it dilutes the meaning from your efforts. So each thing that you institute should be done on its own, so people can kind of enjoy the little halo for a while of having a new benefit to enjoy. Now, here's where I talked about Employee of the Month. Yeah, that's, again, not a good idea. It loses its oomph when you have too much happening at the same time. And if you talk with your employees and your candidates, you really should get a pretty good idea about which employee benefits are meaningful in your industry. One way that you can glean info from candidates that you interview is if you have a conversational interview with people, to ask the candidate, hey, you know, I'd like to know what do you value as an employee as far as benefits go? What's the most meaningful to you? And I think most people are pretty willing to tell you what they value. So you know, even your candidates can be a source of good information for you. All right, now next up in our kind of performance improvement plan is just kind of briefly addressing the path to professional growth. One important and kind of foundational thing is let employees know what they need in order to advance, okay? Every employee should know what they need to do in order to take the next step. Then try to facilitate employees in achieving those requirements. So like if you have an educational requirement, let people know that. If you want to give a tuition reimbursement benefit in order to help them get qualified, that is an appreciated benefit, I think, tuition reimbursement. Make sure you post your jobs internally and you allow upward and lateral movement. Remember that you can prevent the employee from making the internal move, but you can't force them to continue working for your company. So better to have them on board than to lose them if you can. Consider job enrichment when there are no opportunities for advancement. I know I worked for a company that was the structure was very lateral, which means that you had a lot of employees in one specific job and not very much horizontal movement possible. If they stay with your company long enough, they're going to get bored, potentially. So you can consider ways that you might enrich people's jobs, like getting them to serve on ad hoc focus groups, getting them to help you with special projects. Sometimes people are flattered that you invited them to help do something. Encourage people to have enjoyable hobbies outside of work. I used to use this as a kind of a counseling tool in my horizontal structure, where there wasn't much opportunity to grow, to talk to people about their hobbies, how they can enrich their personal lives, which sometimes gets some spillover into their professional lives, if they're to help them, you know, kind of cope with having a job that's not as exciting as it used to be. So anyway, job enrichment when you have the potential to do such a thing. All right, now we're going to talk about toxic culture. How in the world do you improve your culture? So the first thing we need to do is define, what does that mean? Well, a place where disrespect and harassment is tolerated, a place where there are gossips, where there are cliques, where somehow the gossips and the cliques seem to have a certain amount of power, managers who don't know how to manage. And I want to address here a huge mistake that I've seen over and over and over again in my career, where companies take the person who does the job the best and promotes that person into a management position, even though they've had no management experience. Doing a job well and being a manager are two completely separate skill sets. And yes, you want to provide upward mobility and you want people to be able to move up, but in order to be successful at that, sometimes you have to, if they have no managerial experience, you really need to give intensive training for people who have never been managers before in order for them not to just fail shortly in management. Sometimes those people get frustrated, they begin to take it out on their subordinates. The subordinates begin to hate the manager or the boss, and then they eventually fall into the category of people who quit because they had a bad boss. So definitely try to prevent that from happening. Okay, more toxic culture, inconsistent application of rules and policies. That is very bad for morale when some people see other people treated differently from everybody else. A place where employees are fearful, sometimes they're afraid of losing their job, they're afraid of being humiliated because they made a mistake, they're just afraid of getting a demerit over things they can't control. So getting rid of a culture of fear is advisable if you at all can do that. Lack of communication in and of itself doesn't mean your culture is toxic, but it can be a component of a toxic culture where people hate to come in. Like everybody comes in on Monday and they discover that IT has been to the office over the weekend and completely reconfigured everything, so now nobody can log in. That's just something that needs to be communicated in advance so that people know what to expect when they come in. And again, not toxic per se, but certainly it's not very encouraging to a positive atmosphere. So how do you correct that? Well, you do what I call targeted course correction. So analyze your departures. What are the reasons that people are giving you why they quit? When you do exit interviews, which I hope you're doing, what did you learn in the exit interview? And remember that people who are exiting, a lot of times they don't have anything to lose, and so they may be more honest with you. And so you may learn some important things through your exit interviews. Look at who is leaving. Lots of women, lots of older employees, several employees who have the same supervisor, multiple employees who go to the same company. What happens when you have an employee that leaves? Unfortunately, one employee leaving can loosen the bond with other employees. It can make other employees brave. And if somebody has been thinking about leaving for a while and somebody in their department leaves and finds a better job, that can just encourage them to go out and do the same thing. So, analyze what's happening with people who are leaving and then investigate any patterns that you see and use your strategies to come up with ways that you can fix things. Now, cleaning up a toxic culture, and again, I'm having a little slide lag. Identify what needs to be fixed is the first thing you need to do. And then secondly, you need to develop a plan. Might include better communications, more team meetings, more social events, more training for supervisors. And I'm not talking about special event training like we're going to implement some new program. I mean regular, twice a year or so, training to address things with supervisors like enhancing their supervisory skills, knowing the meaning of harassment and how to identify it and how to handle it in their department, communication skills, dealing with conflict. People are not normally born knowing how to do all this stuff. And so if you want to get the most out of your managers and the least toxic environment, then please put training for your supervisors at the top of that list. Another big one is managing problem employees quickly. I know that in HR, we are fearful of just firing people, right? There seem to be so many reasons right now why you can't just let people go. And I'm not saying that terminating people should be your first go-to action when somebody starts exhibiting problems, but you start with talking to people, counseling them, giving them performance improvement plans, letting them know in no uncertain terms that whatever behavior it is that they're exhibiting is absolutely not acceptable, and putting them on notice. Your job is at stake here, and then putting them on some short-term plan to improve performance. Virginia is an at-will state, meaning that you don't have to go through any type of progressive discipline. Either you or the employee can terminate the relationship anytime for no reason or for any reason, as long as it's not an illegal reason. You can't run out and terminate people because they're over 65, but Otherwise, you don't have to keep toxic employees at your company. There may be circumstances where you need to seek legal advice before terminating somebody, and that's I'm very conservative in that regard. And if it's me, a lot of times I am going to seek legal advice before terminating somebody. But you also have the situations where you simply can't accept this, and you just have to let the person go. If you find out that someone is stealing from you, if somebody beats up another employee on your property, that sort of thing, you are going to probably want to handle that right now. But allowing more subtle toxic behaviors to go on and on is something that you don't want to do. You want to deal with it swiftly. Company-wide culture flows from the top down, usually, and if the executive suite is not particularly interested in working on the culture, then really in HR, you just kind of have to step up to try to lead the way. And it's hard. It is very hard if certain levels of management do not exhibit appropriate behaviors. Very hard to get everybody else to do so. But in my opinion, HR can at least, you can give it your best shot. All right, we're only got a few more slides here. And I appreciate those of you who have stuck with us. I know it's been dense. We've had a lot of stuff that we've talked about. But okay, some things that we've lately learned. Believe it or not, about 40% of today's workforce was born after 1980. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, 1980 was kind of the beginning of what I call the modern era. I think of everything before that as being like the, groovy 60s, etc. But it dawned on me the other day that people born in 1980 are now over 40. That just blew me away. That percentage of people born after 1980 is just going to continue to increase, obviously, that percentage. So here's some things to keep in mind when you're dealing with people under 40, 45-ish. They have a tendency to want more work-life balance. Most of these people have partners or spouses that also work, and if they have children, you've got two income families, and people are not interested in being at your work site all weekend or working 60-hour weeks as a rule. Always exceptions to that rule. They are very concerned with having meaningful work. Is my work contributing to some greater good? Now, most companies are not kumbaya kind of companies, but they like the fact if their employer is a good corporate citizen, where they have recycle programs, where the employer seems concerned about the environment, where the employer supports nonprofit organizations. So keep that in mind. They want the 40 hours a week they spend at work to be meaningful in some way. They don't view work and home in that binary. They're flexible when it comes to when and where they work. They can work anywhere. So unlike people like myself who really grew up in a different era as a boomer, where you had your home and you had your work, now those things tend to be thought of as more combined. Many of them are overwhelmed by student debt, which means they may delay marriage, children, home ownership. This is where some of your benefits could come in if you consider paying down on your people's student debt as a benefit. And once again, they like ethical companies and they like ethical company leaders. They want the company to care about their well-being, and that's when you start structuring some of these benefits to communicate to people, we value you, like having an employee assistance program, giving people maybe mental health days off. Like you get 2 mental health days a year where, you know what, you just get to go and chill for 2 days if you want to. And anything that you do like that. You have seminars that don't benefit the company but that benefit the employee. All those little things can go into showing the employees that you care about them. So keep that in mind, that those things are not likely to turn back the other way. Those things are likely, more and more people are going to probably be interested in those things. And there may be more And certainly there will be more stuff that develops, as technology gets, we move forward technologically, stuff that we probably can't even imagine, like pets at work 40 years ago. Those are going to come down the pipe for you to deal with. All right, I'm going to do just real quick. I want to talk about some ongoing relationship management, and then we will be done. When I say ongoing relationship management, what I mean is to think about your recruiting and your retention over the long run, as opposed to things that are more in the short term. So 3 ways that you can help in your relationship management. The first one is to form employee alumni groups. I know back when I was starting out in HR, many companies had a policy: if you quit here, you can never be rehired. We do not rehire former employees. Now I have to ask myself, why would a company ever have had that policy? I don't know, but I know that was very common among companies 40 or 50 years ago. So an employee alumni group. When employees leave your company, if they're good employees, I think that you should let them know that if they are ever interested in coming back, to please contact you, because that door is not closed. Obviously, you're not going to guarantee them a job. I mean, I guess you could, but probably not wise, or make them any promises, but to simply say, you've really been a good employee, and if you decide to come back, if we have a place for you, we would probably hire you back. That makes the employee feel good, for one thing, and that's just a real compliment to that employee. And it also may, when they get to their new employment, if the grass turns out to be slightly less green than they thought, your words may ring in their ears, and they may think, wow, I wonder if they really meant that. And you may get a phone call. So that's keeping up with ex-employees is a good way to possibly rehire some people. So, form an employee alumni group. Have somebody, if someone on HR staff has time, to periodically send an email to your alumni group. Maybe send them the company newsletters that they distribute internally. Again, depending on the type of information that's in there, you obviously aren't going to send confidential stuff out. Shoot them emails when you have openings, because they may work with somebody or know somebody that's looking for a job, and they love you because you like them. They may tell somebody else, hey, look, this company is great. They even offered to rehire me when I left. So employee alumni groups, they don't really cost anything, and yet who knows, that could be a source of rehires. The second ongoing relationship management method would be what I call right candidate, wrong time relationships. If you've ever interviewed for a job, if you've ever interviewed candidates and you ended up with 2 or 3 really promising candidates and you could only hire one of those, my suggestion is, when you call the other 2, be honest and say, we had 3 really good candidates, and unfortunately the team made the decision to hire one of the other candidates. However, we feel like you'd be a really good fit here at some point, and I would love to keep in touch with you and see if something works out, in a month or 6 months or a year. I cannot tell you over the course of my career how many people I ended up hiring based on that. I vividly remember a woman who lived in New York contacting me about a move that she was going to make, I think it was in a year. And of course, that did me no good at all for my current openings, but I was like, you know what? I absolutely want your resume. And when she sent it to me, I kept up with her for that whole year. And when she moved, she did not even go anywhere else. She came right to my door, and we interviewed and I hired her on the spot. So it happens. Tell them you would like to keep in touch. Stay connected through emails, notes. Just let them know that you're still thinking about them. And then the final relationship management is to form a little program of student internships. Now, this does have a cost, obviously, because you're paying somebody to work at your firm. but 1 or 2 summer internships, or even during the school year internships, is a real credit to your organization. If you're looking at it from the long view, make certain that you give them meaningful work while they're there, okay? Not just file clerk if possible, but give them meaningful work to do. And again, this can be a PR move on your part where they go back to their school and talk about your company, about how wonderful it is and how much they appreciate that internship. Just plants a seed. If they're working with a high school guidance counselor, they may tell the counselor. So you just never know how your goodwill can end up paying off, and you can keep track of these people while they're in college. And you know, it wouldn't be unheard of for them to actually come to work for your company once they're done with their education. So those are my thoughts on trying to enhance your recruiting and retention program. I know I've been talking nonstop now for over an hour and a half, and I do appreciate your patience and your attention. Hopefully you are able to, we're able to glean some things that you can use. And by the way, we are going to send you these slides. So, and also if you have questions, you can go ahead and put a question out there if you want to, and I'm going to get to those in a minute. But my final thoughts are, start slow and small, weigh risks and benefits of any type of program you're thinking of implementing. Consider putting a sundown on new benefits or programs that you embark on. So for example, you may say in 2022 or 2023, we're going to do this program, so that if it doesn't work or you didn't like it or it had some negative aspect that you didn't anticipate, you're not obligated. It doesn't appear to be a loss when it goes away, because people knew it was going away. On the other hand, you can continue it into the next year with no problem at all. Use your resources. You never know when one of your employees just might really appreciate a special project, or they might want to be part of a committee, or they might want to serve in some way. Run ideas by trusted peers. You know, sometimes 2 heads really are better than 1, and ask someone that you trust to critique your idea honestly, letting you know what the drawbacks might be. And then, you know, be kind to yourself, be kind to other people. Don't beat yourself up for all the work that you have to do, and sometimes you just can't do everything as well as you'd like to. Sometimes you just can't get it all into one day. If you can't implement a lot of these things, if you thought some of them were good ideas but just can't do it right now, don't beat yourself up over that either. But I would urge you to consider what small things that you might do to give yourself that competitive edge. So my final real slide is just a few resources for your edification. I lean very heavily, excuse me, on all 3 of these. JD Supra is helpful for figuring out laws that maybe need some translation for you. For example, if you wanted to say, do I have to let my employee in Virginia off for jury duty? That last website, JD Supra, is the place you would go to find that out. And if you're doing a Google search, the way I would search it would be jury duty laws, Virginia employees, and then I would put JD Supra as part of the search, and that way it'll take you right back to the direct page that's addressed on that website, rather than going to the website first and then trying to find where jury duty laws by state are, if that makes sense. Anyway, thank you all so much. We love and value our clients so much, and I talk to many of you on a regular basis, and I'm just so happy to be able to reach out and help you all with anything that, or with something like recruiting and retention that may be a topic that you have an interest in. So look forward to other things that we're going to do at some time in the future. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and enjoy the hot weather coming. Should I go out? I'm sorry. Once again, my technical challenge is making it self-evident here. Let's see if we have any questions. No, actually, at this moment, we do not have any questions. I'm sorry. Everybody's probably going, oh my gosh, what did I just hear? So anyway, thank you all again and again. And we are getting some thank yous up there, and we do very much appreciate your feedback. And please, you've got our contact information. Corbin was not able to join us today, but there's her email address, and you'll see my email address on there as well. So feel free to just touch base, because I really do enjoy talking to our HR clients, and I can't say again how much work you've done in the past few years, and how much credit you deserve for all the stuff that you've made happen. So take care, and I'll talk to you soon.